Morning all. I had an interesting game last night against someone over 200 ECF, Andrew Stone, who's also one of my fierce rivals on Scramble, and he's amazing on Scramble. I'm just lucky to win 1 in 50. So this was chess, so maybe a better chance here. I was playing black. He kicked off actually surprisingly with B3. I thought he played something else, but I played E5, which I consider one of the strongest moves in principle, trying to immediately blunt this bishop, to have a barrier for this bishop. So the Nimzo-Larsen system, after Nimzovich and Larsen, the heavy users of this. And it's also a move which has appeared on Chess.com in the voting match against Grandmaster Simon Williams. I thought that was a very, very interesting game at the moment in progress to check out. Bishop B2, I played knight C6. After E3, knight F6, and the idea here is to react to what is usually played bishop B5 with bishop D6. And interestingly, knight A3, which I thought was quite dangerous in blitz on the ICC. There's an IM George that has been playing this against me a lot. Apparently black is supposed to play knight A5 to stop this knight C4. I thought for some reason it was dynamic to allow knight C4 and doubling the pawns, but if you don't play knight A5 here, I think this is quite interesting for white to allow this knight. If white gets in this knight C4, I think well, it's an interesting position. White is quite comfortable, I think, here. But in the game, actually, instead of playing bishop b5, actually he played c4, and this is actually the second most popular according to Livebook, by not too much of a distance. There were 376 games with bishop b5 and 258 with c4, so it's quite a common move alternative. I played not immediate d5, which is apparently the most popular, but I played d6, and then we see knight c3. I played bishop e7 here, and that was a difficult decision for me as a King's Indian player to play bishop e7. Actually, the most common move is g6, but I remember instinctively that I'm getting into trouble usually facing this bishop on b2 in blitz or whatever, because you're really inviting some extra dark square weaknesses. Bishop e7 though seems a bit on the passive side, and I'll put on the kibitzer here, although it doesn't create dark square weaknesses voluntarily. It might, if white plays energetically, I can imagine actually this knight being a victim. There are different ways of playing this for white. Maybe with queen c2 and trying to castle, queen side even. So this could be quite interesting. This kind of plan. Bishop g4, maybe just a3, and I think white's doing okay actually. I'm not convinced that bishop e7 is a great idea. Maybe the most common move, which is g6, may be better, but here, to my surprise actually, g3, which volunteers some light square weaknesses, and it seems particularly bad in this position. If white's already played e3, then it's kind of emphasizing even more the light square weaknesses in the position. I thought, hold on, here I can also try and provoke more weaknesses with bishop g4. I think white should be playing bishop e2 here, but instead after f3, that was a bit of a surprise, bishop e6. I think black's already doing quite well here, because white's control of d5 is a bit lacking. If bishop g2, maybe just d5 in this position. So I was quite encouraged already by this position after bishop e6. I actually thought I'm in for a comfortable game, surely, from this position. And then I saw a very interesting move. Okay, my opponent played knight h3. Andrew played knight h3, and that might have ideas either to go to e4 via f2 or try and snatch this bishop. And here I thought for a bit about h6, and I thought this is a bit passive, because then, okay, maybe knight f2, and white surely is doing quite well on the e4 square. I remember the knight in the Simon Williams game on chessgames.com. I didn't really want a nicely perched knight. You can imagine with G4 later, just to stop F5s, say white castling queenside after A3, Queen C2, you can imagine a knight perched eventually on E4, and if ever black plays D5, you're giving the C-file pressure. So I wasn't really that keen after a while looking at H6, and I was thinking, is there some sort of form of positional sacrifice that could be played here to further the position rather than H6? I thought, oh, hold on, okay, I can play D5, I can give up voluntarily the light square bishop to try and get in D4, because this would blunt this bishop. So D5. This might not be that good though. Maybe technically, H6 might be better. The engine's suggestions actually don't include H6. They include things like Queen D7 at the moment, A5, Queen C8, castles. There's no mention. Okay, there's a little bit of a mention of H6 as a move, but there's definitely no mention of this move, just D5 here. I think engines believe, well, my engine believes, I think this is now equal now after knight G5. I've done something quite naughty. If white can take all the benefits of this attempted positional sacrifice without any downsides, then white is actually going to be better. I played D4, and it's the way white has to react here, but I think positionally now, actually there's an evaluation shift almost in black's favour if white doesn't play precisely. The bishop was taken, f takes, okay, it's a target potentially like this, but it's also a target potentially on the e file. This is a potential weakness, even though I've blunted the bishop here. But my opponent here has to play accurately, and the engine's suggestion is actually, well, funny enough, the evaluation is actually now in black's favour overall. It's difficult to assess these imbalances here. The bishop being blunted versus the double pawns versus e6 in particular. Is that an exploitable weakness via the e file? It's difficult to balance it out. I thought overall it was going to be okay for me, and the engine's indicating that black might be better. So let's say e takes d4. Apparently, black has to play to get any advantage. Knight takes d4, which wasn't my original intention, and we could have a variation looking like this: bishop g2, queen d7, with the idea. Now h5 is quite dangerous. So if white plays h4, then castling queenside, bishop c3, knight f5, and black is looking a lot better now. In fact, the advantage is growing for black. Very strong control of the d file here. Weaknesses for white to pick on. In fact, that g3 seems diabolical. You might think, well, was this actually forced? What is this nonsense? You might think with having to play h4. Well, if black's threat of h4 is allowed, pardon me, if we just castle here, then h4 is actually quite dangerous. It's just threatening to really maximise the activity of the rook for free. Say f4 here, hg, we've got a very vicious rook on the h file, and move like knight h5 now. It's just dangerous for white, this position apparently. If we go like this, here for example, knight takes g3, we've got this check. So that kind of position with knight takes d4 still seems to convince the engines that actually black's doing okay, even in this continuation with ed. But if I played e takes d, just trying to blunt the bishop, apparently white's okay with knight a4 here. White apparently is okay with a small edge. You can imagine this. So white has got the bishop pair. The bishop looks very nice here. This is okay for white. King safety is fine. Bishop pair. It's all gone very well here for white. So that would have been perhaps the only way to really get an advantage in this continuation. So in this continuation, if ed, which I think is the strongest try, but my opponent here played knight e4, and this all of a sudden is not that hot for white, I spot something about this position that in fact my original plan of just blunting the bishop can be replaced with a much more tactical, dangerous plan now. I simply play a set of forcing moves. Knight takes e4, f takes e4. Now white's not threatening queen h5, the pawn is protected by the knight. But here, can you spot what black can play now? Okay, if I give you 10 seconds here, what would you play with black? Or you might want to pause the video. So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, to my delight, discovering this, that actually I can just play d takes e here, and all of a sudden this bishop can return with a vengeance for a lethal check, and this bishop is not really helping against this check on b2. So d takes. It's delightful to be able to play this. Bishop b4, disrupting my opponent from castling. King f2, and there was a very strong temptation here to castle with check. That's quite flashy. I don't usually get the chance to castle with check. I thought, is it flashy for flashiness sake? I didn't really see a full clear-cut continuation for that. But the engine is suggesting, just the ordinary, queen f6 as well is pretty good. Rook f8 or castling the strongest. Its particular continuation is quite amazing. If I just castled, then actually the simple queen f6, and it looks as though isn't the white queen parrying these threats, but queen e2, rook at a d8 now threatens rook d2, skewering the queen, so bishop c1 to protect d2. This is just a variation, but here this is apparently really crushing. Can you spot what black can do in this position if I give you 10 seconds in this variation? Just queen g6 is on e4. If the queen goes to c2, it's a weakness of the last move which can be tapped into. Bishop e1 now, and there's numerous threats here. Well, the principal one could be knight b4, just to kick the queen away from e4, as well as say a3. Then I think we can just win the queen. That's a huge advantage for black with rook f2. So it's a disaster. So that just simple castling with check. For some reason, I had the idea though, same sort of ideas of playing like rook d8, but I wanted pressure on e3 because I didn't want the king going to g1. And I'm still reserving my castling with check. So bishop c1, rook d8, queen e2, castling with check now, king g2. And we have a situation here similar to the variation I've just shown you, where e4 can be a problem. And in fact, well, actually, the engine likes my move here regarding e4. I wanted to stamp out the defensive idea of queen c2. I didn't see, for some reason, I'm not sure I saw in this position. I mean, queen g6 is good. Queen c2, there's bishop e1. That is a crunching move in this position. What does actually white do here? If bishop d3, we've just got knight b4. That is horrible. If bishop e2, then check. And in this position, knight b4. So as soon as e4 drops, I'm mating on g2. So anyway, I played, the engine does like this move anyway now, at depth 20, it likes the move I played, which was actually bishop c3. So the idea is to set up the rook as an unprotected piece on b1, and also now deprive the queen of c2, so knight b4, so to make just queen g6 a lot more effective than it would have been. And this is an absolutely crushing position here. In the game, h3 was played. So h3. What else for white? what can white do here? If A3, just trying to evict things, then knight D3 actually is very strong, just to get into that F2. So the kind of swap of the double pawn to the F file, obviously the F file is pretty useful, more than the light square bishop at the moment. So the positional sacrifice clearly has paid off for the activity versus the bishop pair. In other positions, obviously, you know, if in the right circumstances, the bishop pair could have been celebrated, but it doesn't seem so here. Black's got all the pieces mobilized. White's pieces are kind of stuck mostly to the first rank. It's a bit of a horror show. So anyway, H3, which looks as though Queen G4 is coming to the rescue for the E4 pawn if Queen G6. But I've just got Knight D3, and the engine suggests that's actually the most crushing move. But I was my intention though was not the engine's intention on Queen G4, which wasn't played. My opponent tried sacking the Queen, but before we get to that, Queen G4, there's a really crushing idea here of check, and on King G1, amazingly, can you see how black can win this position? If I gave you 10 seconds here, there's a few puzzle scenarios to explore here. So black to play, what would you play as black in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, and this wasn't, I didn't see this, well, it wasn't played Queen G4 to test this, but maybe I would have found it, I don't know. Rook takes F1 is just knocking out all the defences after Queen F6. It's mating, unless white wants to give up the Queen, we're getting a mate, of course. Actually, double check, mate, that's quite crushing. So, yeah, that, I was intention, my first analysis of this was just Queen takes G4 just to secure an advantage with Knight F2, with the idea of taking on E4 and then putting a rook on the 7th, and I thought that would be good enough. This position is like nearly -4, but it's letting white survive another day, so that's much crisper, the idea of rook takes F1 in this position. If this had been played, Queen G4, sorry, rook F2 first, to make sure the king is the one taking on F1, and then this Queen F6 is lethal with that knight on D3. But in the game, actually, my opponent played this queen sack, Queen takes D3, so I played rook takes D3, bishop takes, and here an even stronger move apparently than rook D8, which I thought was pretty strong. That's like the second strongest. Apparently Queen H5 is pretty strong here, just threatening Queen F3. If G4, then Queen H4. White's having real trouble defending these basic squares, actually. But rook D8 I thought was pretty strong as well here, with a certain idea. So after the bishop moves, I go into a potential self-bend, but it's harmless. I play bishop D2 just to get E3. So justifying my early Queen G5 on that E3. If the pin, white resigned here. If rook D1, just Queen takes E3. So I'm on E2. So this position, I can play something like rook D3. So it's all falling to bits there for white. So yeah, it was one of my most crushing wins. It's my most crushing win of anyone with black pieces this season, probably in the last couple of seasons, actually, especially someone of that rating. It's one of my most crushing, King's crushing wins, I think, this game. So I'm quite pleased with it. But unfortunately, the team lost overall. Barnet lost. Watford I think, are the favourites again to win Division 1. I hope you enjoyed that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.